Hello, my name is Katie Tully, and welcome to the National School Lunch Program Equipment Assistance Grants Procurement webinar. I am joined today by Jennifer Howarder. We are School Nutrition Program Specialists in the Nutrition Services Division. Our hope for you today is that viewing this presentation will assist you to follow the correct procurement guidelines and submit the correct documentation for your purchases made with the Equipment Assistance Grant money. Our contact information is available at the end of this webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to inform NSLP equipment grant recipients of federal and state procurement requirements when using grant funds. This training is not intended to provide a complete explanation of all laws and regulations applicable to procurement. The SFA is responsible for ensuring procurements comply with all applicable laws, regulations, program instructions, and guidance materials. It is important that all recipients of the National School Lunch Program Equipment Assistance Grants review and understand the requirements in this training so that the California Department of Education does not need to recover improperly used grant funds. Throughout this webinar, we will refer to the National School Lunch Program as NSLP and the Equipment Assistance Grant as Equipment Grant. We will refer to a school food authority as an SFA. The topics that we will cover in this webinar are general grant requirements, debarment, suspension, and lobbying, definition of equipment, capitalization threshold, types of procurement, bid thresholds, formal procurement, informal procurement, equipment considerations, required paperwork, equipment quote, purchase order, final invoice, proof of payment, delivery receipt, paperwork submission. First, we will cover the general grant requirements.
A general grant requirement of the equipment grant is that the SFA spend grant funds on approved equipment. An SFA may only purchase equipment approved for awarded sites. It is important that SFAs understand equipment grant funding is school site and equipment specific. Equipment purchases for school sites other than the sites awarded are not allowed. Likewise, equipment purchases must be for the equipment items that were approved by the CDE. For example, an SFA has two sites, sites A and B. Site A was awarded $5,000 to purchase a convection oven, but Site B was not awarded funds. Site B's refrigerator malfunctioned and needs to be replaced. The SFA may not use Site A grants towards a new refrigerator purchase at Site B. Funds may only be used to purchase a convection oven at Site A.
Another general equipment grant requirement is that SFAs must complete all procurement activities within the award period. Procurement activities include all of the activities outlined in this webinar, including the payment for equipment. This slide shows an excerpt of a grant award notification, or GAN, that is mailed to each SFA awarded an equipment grant. Please note the circled award starting and ending dates in this example. In this example, the SFA must have completed all procurement activities between July 1st, 2014 and May 1st, 2015. SFAs must not purchase equipment before the award period. The CDE will recover funds from SFAs that purchase before or after their award period. See your GAN for your grant award period.
If the total purchase is greater than or equal to $25,000, SFAs must require vendors to complete and submit certification regarding debarment and suspension. If the total purchase price is greater than or equal to $100,000, SFAs must require vendors to complete and submit certification regarding lobbying. Find the certifications at CDE's Suspension, Debarment, and Lobbying website at the address noted on the slide. Please note that these requirements are for the total purchase price from a vendor regardless of funding source. For example, if an SFA spends $100,000 on equipment from a vendor and $20,000 of the total spent was from equipment grant funds, The debarment and suspension certification and the lobbying certification are required. The SFA should keep this certification in their records.
It is important to understand how the grant defines equipment. Federal regulations define equipment as tangible personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year and a per-unit acquisition cost that equals or exceeds the federal capitalization threshold of $5,000. In other words, the total cost of each piece of equipment must equal or exceed $5,000. Equipment purchases of less than $5,000 are considered supplies. SFAs cannot group together multiple items to meet the threshold. For example, an SFA cannot buy 2 ovens at $2,500 each in order to meet the $5,000 threshold. Each oven's total cost must be at least $5,000. Total equipment unit costs include shipping, tax, and installation. Equipment does not have to be new.
According to Title II Code of Federal Regulations, Section 200.33, the definition of equipment is a piece of equipment that has a per-unit acquisition cost that equals or exceeds $5,000. SFAs may use a lower capitalization threshold if the SFA provides documentation of board approval at the time of grant application submission. If no board approval of lower capitalization threshold exists, the SFA must use the federal capitalization threshold of $5,000.
SFAs that accept an equipment grant must abide by the Federal Procurement Regulations in Title VII Code of Federal Regulations, Part 210.21, and Title II Code of Federal Regulations, Part 317 through 326. Equipment must be procured competitively.
Equipment purchases must be procured competitively using either formal or informal procurement methods. Both procurement methods have their own requirements, and SFAs must adhere to the proper type of procurement in order to avoid having to return grant funds.
Applicable federal and state bid thresholds determine if SFAs use the formal or informal procurement method. Effective August 30th, 2012, the federal small purchase threshold is $150,000. The 2015 state bid threshold is $86,000. This changes January 1st of each calendar year. The most current state bid threshold is posted on the CDE Accounting Correspondence webpage at the web address shown on the slide. If the sum of all the equipment purchases from one supplier or vendor exceeds the applicable bid threshold, then the SFA is required to follow the formal procurement process.
If your site is a charter school, private school, or residential child care institution, you must use the federal threshold. If your site is a public school or county office of education, you must use the state threshold.
This slide provides an example of when SFAs are required to publicly advertise a request for proposal, known as an RFP, or an invitation for bid, known as an IFB. For example, an SFA is approved to purchase equipment for 5 sites. Each site is awarded approximately $20,000. Each site requests similar equipment to purchase from one supplier or vendor. The total award for the 5 sites is approximately $100,000. The aggregate equipment purchase exceeds the 2015 state bid threshold of $86,000, therefore necessitating the formal procurement process.
For more information, see the CDE's Procurement webpage Procurement tab at the address noted on the slide.
SFAs may use informal procurement processes when their equipment purchases are less than the applicable small purchase threshold. Although less rigorous than the formal procurement method, SFAs must still conduct the competitive procurement process.
Prior to purchasing equipment, we recommend that SFAs determine their equipment needs by first considering the existing space, equipment compatibility, delivery timeframe, and equipment budget. Understanding these items will help SFAs develop specifications for the equipment and assist in obtaining adequate and competitive quotes from vendors.
All SFAs are required to submit to the CDE evidence of procurement by the award period deadline in order to ensure that they can keep the grant funds and receive their final 10% payment. The documentation required is the following: invitation for bid for formal procurement only, vendor price quotes, purchase order, final invoice, expenditure payment, delivery and installation receipts. We cover each of the required paperwork items in the following slides.
Formal procurement requires 3 quotes. Informal procurement recommends 3 quotes as a best practice, but requires 2 quotes. The quotes must originate from different vendors, have the same or similar specifications including accessories, include tax, shipping, and installation fees if applicable, originate from the vendor and not be written by the SFA. The quote requirement is subject to exception. See slide 25 for more information. Remember, quotes must be for the awarded equipment and have a total cost that is greater than or equal to $5,000 per item or the SFA's lower capitalization threshold amount.
In the following slides, we provide an example of the paperwork required for the procurement of a tilting skillet. For example, an SFA was awarded $15,000 for a tilting skillet. The SFA identified the following quote specifications: 30-gallon capacity tilting skillet, voltage of 115 and 2 amps motor, gas capacity, spray hose and pan carrier accessories, delivery specified on the quote, under $15,000 total cost.
When asking for quotes from vendors, SFAs must give the vendors detailed specifications for the equipment. This example of a quote shows the following noted in red. Number 1, the tilting skillet specifications. Number 2, inclusion of guarantee. Number 3, voltage and motor. Number 4, pan carrier accessories. Number 5, spray hose accessory. Number 6, freight. Number 7, tax. And number 8, total. None of this can be summarized by the school. It is all provided by the vendor. For the other 2 quotes to be considered competitive, they must meet specifications.
This quote contains the same desired specifications, so it is a comparable quote. The quote is not summarized by the school, so it is all provided by the vendor. Like the previous quote, this example shows the following. Number 1, the tilting skillet specifications. Number 2, inclusion of guarantee. Number 3, voltage and motor. Number 4, pan carrier accessory. Number 5, spray hose accessory. Number 6, freight. Number 7, tax. Number 8, total. Now we just have to look at the third and final quote to see if it meets specifications.
The third quote also contains the same specifications, so it is a comparable quote.
This next example is a quote that does not meet the SFA's established specifications. In particular, as noted in the red circle, the gallon capacity is larger. Additionally, the pan carrier and spray hose accessories are not included. Also, the total price exceeds the total equipment cost specification of $15,000. This vendor's quote is considered non-responsive. If a quote with differing specifications was included in an SFA's quote paperwork, the SFA's grant funds could be jeopardized.
Once the SFA has obtained all quotes, the SFA must choose the lowest bidder. It is not always possible for an SFA to obtain 3 quotes. In this case, SFAs must document attempts to get 3 quotes. If your SFA is experiencing difficulty with the procurement process, please contact the Equipment Grant team at equipmentgrants@cde.ca.gov prior to purchasing equipment. If the SFA does not choose the lowest quote or ensure adequate competition, then the CDE may recover grant funds for that piece of equipment.
We will now discuss the requirements for purchase orders. A purchase order must be signed and dated by the SFA's authorized representative, dated within the grant award period, equal to the total price on the quote. Purchase orders for equipment purchased outside the grant award period will not be funded. Please refer to the slides entitled General Requirements to find your award period on your grant award notification.
We determined in our earlier quote example that Arrow Restaurant Equipment was the lowest bidder. On this sample purchase order, it shows the SFA is purchasing the equipment from Arrow Restaurant Equipment, which is indicated in the top left corner of the purchase order. Purchase orders must be for the same equipment stated on the vendor's quote. We can see here this purchase order contains the following. Number 1, the model number is the same as the quote. Number 2, it includes the same guarantee, motor, and accessories as the quote. Number 3, the price is the same as the quote. And number 4, it is signed and dated within the grant award period.
SFAs are required to send a final invoice to CDE with their invoice package. Final invoices must have a signed annotation stating the invoice is final and dated within the grant award period. Contain equipment consistent with equipment on the price quote of the awarded vendor. Equal the total on the purchase order and the quote. If not, the SFA must provide an explanation. The general expectation is the total purchase price on a final invoice should match the total on the quote. However, it is possible for a final invoice to have a different total than a quote. For example, an SFA may have been quoted a different tax rate than they were charged on their final invoice. If the final invoice total does not equal the quote, please provide an explanation. Please remember that the total cost of each piece of equipment must be greater than or equal to $5,000 or the SFA's capitalization threshold. Final invoices for equipment purchased outside the grant award period will not be funded.
The final invoice shows the following. Number 1, it is dated within the grant award period. Number 2, the equipment matches the purchase order. Number 3, it is signed. And number 4, it is above the $5,000 capitalization threshold.
Proof of payment is also required. SFAs must provide proof of payment in either the form of a check issued to the vendor or a fiscal report showing the SFA payment for the invoiced equipment. Please note, for public school districts and county offices of education, equipment grant payments should come from Resource Code 5314 and not from Resource Code 5310.
In this example, the payment matches the dollar amount on the final invoice and is paid to the order of the selected vendor. In our example, that vendor was Arrow Restaurant Equipment.
Delivery and installation receipts offer proof the SFA installed equipment at the awarded site. If the equipment is originally delivered to a site other than the awarded site, the SFA must provide documentation the equipment was delivered and installed at the correct site. Sometimes SFAs will direct the vendor to deliver a piece of equipment to a main district office or warehouse. If this happens, then the SFA must submit documentation that the equipment was ultimately delivered to the awarded site. This documentation can take the form of packing slips. It must show the approved equipment was installed at the correct site.
This is an example of a delivery receipt. The documentation shows that the equipment was 1, delivered to the site awarded, and 2, the receipt is signed, proving that delivery was accepted. If the equipment had been delivered to a central location, the SFA would have included further documentation to show that the equipment was delivered and installed at the correct site. For example, a work order that shows the date and site where the equipment was installed at a later date. SFAs must number all required paperwork for each piece of equipment as shown in this slide. Number 1, quote. Number 2, purchase order. Number 3, final invoice. Number 4, expenditure payments. Number 5, delivery and installation receipts. This allows CDE staff to move through your package quickly and ensures that we can find all the necessary documentation for timely approval. Submit the final appropriately labeled package to Equipment Assistance Grants, Nutrition Services Division, California Department of Education, 1430 N Street, Suite 4503, Sacramento, California, 95814. Let's review some important information provided in this webinar. You need to understand your bidding threshold, assess your needs before purchasing equipment, purchase only approved equipment with grant funds, and mind your equipment threshold because equipment should have a total cost of $5,000 or more or a cost at or above the SFA's lower capitalization threshold. Additionally, you must collect quotes depending on your bidding threshold with comparable specifications and purchase from the lowest bidder. Complete all procurement activities within the grant award period, and contact the equipment grant team if you are experiencing difficulty with your procurements at equipmentgrants@cde.ca.gov. Please review this webinar as often as necessary to ensure that you are following the correct procedures. If you have questions, do not hesitate to ask. Email the equipment grant team at equipmentgrants@cde.ca.gov.